Today with our study, our case studies of peace. What am I saying? Case studies of trust. Yeah, we only sang a bunch of songs about trust. And so today we are going to shift our study to Rahab. Now, on the surface, this would not appear to be a story about trust in God at all. And in fact, it is about trusting in the people of God. And this is a very important thing for us to consider today. What you're seeing up here in this piece of stained glass is the shofar. And of course, that is an important element to this story of Jericho today. So we're going to take a look at Rahab. What do we know about Rahab? Here is a interesting picture of a artist's rendition of Rahab. Perhaps she has just let the spies down the rope and is about ready to go back into her abode. But this is what the artist thought. Now, we only scratched the surface of the story of Rahab. I could have made Dan go on to verse 24. The whole chapter is about Rahab, but I'll bring some things up about that. So if you have your Bibles with you, and you have them open to Joshua 2. I will make some references to that. So what do we know about this Rahab? Well, first of all, we know she's a harlot. That is, I think we all know what a harlot is. Although I had questions about that as I studied it this week, because she never is not called Rahab the harlot, even after she is... at the end of the story when all things have come out right. And I thought, that's interesting. Usually, we know God renames you. Well, she remains the harlot. But when I looked up the meaning of that word, it means unfaithful, okay? And so I think it's a bit of Jewish humor here, if you look at it. Because the fact that she was unfaithful to Jericho and faithful to God was able to do great things. You see how that is? And that's a very interesting flip there. That's all I'll say about that. But she is a citizen of Jericho. And what historians tell us is that Jericho is the oldest fortified city in world history. In world history. That means that as far back as 8,000 BC, there was a city that was fortified on that spot. Now, I don't know if you know much about archaeology in the Middle East and thousands of years of archaeology, but if you're a walled city and you're one of the first in the world, your walls don't get weaker as your city grows. They get stronger. And that's significant here. Because this is a city that, by all accounts, is unassailable. So keep that in mind as we go. So here we are. How is her trust like many people's trust today? And so far, my proclamation to you is to trust God and your faith will grow, right? And so now we turn to see people. And I told you a couple of weeks ago that I had the privilege of having a great scholar as my Old Testament professor. And he said, if you understand the Old Testament as a Christian, then you will understand how people work today. Because people don't change, okay? People don't change. Their character, what is important to them stays the same over time. And as a historian, I would agree with that. So let's see what this says about her. First thing, she knew the power of the Lord. Even though she lived in this great and mighty city that was unassailable, she knew the power of the Lord. And what we find here is if you drop down to 9, she said to the men, I know that the Lord has given you this land, and that the terror of you has fallen on us, and that all the inhabitants of the land have melted away before you. The Lord has given you this land already. That's amazing. Here's this woman living in this bastion of a town, and she looks at these men who have conquered nothing and probably are the worst spies in history, right? Israel has the Mossad, that's their secret agents. These guys are not even Mossad. They walked into the city, and the first night people said, those guys are here to spy on us. Right? So they were caught before they began. But Rahab says, listen, you already conquered this city. Even before you take it, it's the Lord's. The next thing that she identifies is that the Lord removes obstacles. She says this to them. She says, not only do people melt away before you, but we have heard how the Lord dried up the water of the Red Sea before you, and how you came out of Egypt, and what you did to the two kings of the Amorites who were beyond the Jordan, to Sihon and Og, whom you utterly destroyed. The Lord removes obstacles from your place. Again, I'll bring it to your attention. This is 80 years after the fact. The parting of the Red Sea made a large impression throughout the Middle East, didn't it? If 80 years later, they're like, yeah, we heard about that. God opened it up before you. He removes obstacles before his people. And finally, the Lord demoralizes his enemies. Listen to what she says. For we have heard how the Lord, 11. And when we heard it, our hearts melted, and no courage remained in any man any longer because of you. For the Lord your God, he is God in heaven and on earth below. Wow. I guess if he parted the Red Sea, he can bring the walls of Jericho down, and they know it. The second thing that she does is she asks God's people for mercy. So let's recount this first. The first thing she does is she acknowledges that the Lord they serve is powerful, right? Now, mind you here, she doesn't trust in the Lord. I don't even think she knows how to trust in the Lord. But she says, no, your Lord is trustworthy, and we know it to you. The second thing she does is she asks God's people for mercy for her family. If you continue down, she says this, she says, now, therefore, please swear to me by your Lord, since I have dealt kindly with you and hid you, that you will deal kindly with my father's household and give me a promise, a pledge of truth, and spare my father and my mother and my brothers and my sisters with all who belong to them, and deliver our lives from death. So the men said to her, our life for yours, if you do not tell this business of ours, and it shall come about when the Lord gives us the land that we will deal kindly and faithfully with you. She asked God's people for mercy for her family. That says a lot about Rahab. She thought about others. She wasn't saving herself. She was saving her father and her brothers and her father's household. But she was wise, because to these servants of God, she obtained a promise. She said, make me a promise. And once she got the promise, she aided their work. She hid them in the reeds. She helped them escape by lowering a cord down outside the window, and they climbed out. So she helped them escape. And then the last thing, she headed them for the hills. All right? I haven't read that, but she said, now once you hit the ground, don't go back to that ford, because they went looking for you. Go in the hills, wait a couple of days, and then take the long way around. Wow. She had a plan. Her plan was important because she received the promise, right? She wanted to see that promise come through. Now, the last thing is she followed directions. If you are a teen and you are sitting in this service, I want you to pay special attention to this. She followed directions given by God's people. Now, before I get into that, let me tell you how important, and we know this, and if you're struggling with this right now, even as an adult, following the Lord's instructions, the Lord wants his instructions followed. And teens, I will say this to you, if you are being brought up by godly parents and they're giving you instructions, it's to your benefit to listen to them. Grandparents, if you have grandchildren and you're giving them godly instructions, it's important for them to listen to it. Because those instructions are important for their safety, their health, and their welfare in God. She followed the directions. And what the direction was that she would hang a red cord outside of her window. And that window that you see up there, I think you see it up there, don't you? Is probably what the window looked like. The initial window looked like it was, a big Pella window she was hanging out of, but that doesn't make any sense for, a fortification. It was probably just a window big enough for those guys to squeeze out and then go down the wall. And there, the red cord hung. It's always kind of interested me. That's dangerous in and of itself. Hey, Rahab, you got a red cord hanging out your window. What's up with that? Who knows how she explained that? But there it did. And she trusted. She had to be there. Because once the walls fell, okay, flat is what the Bible tells us, okay, not crumbled. Archaeologists have found that the city of Jericho at one point in time, they chalk it up to earthquake. The walls went bam like that. They went flat. They didn't crumble into mounds. They fell flat. Now think about that. She lived along the wall. It must have fallen like dominoes. And then when it got around to her house, there it stood with the red cord. She listened to instructions because it was important. She harbored her family. And she had to tell her family, no matter what you want to do, when the rumble of the walls start to happen, do not run out of this house. Because they told me, if anybody runs out of this house, we're not responsible for their safety. They're dead. Wow. That is a lot of trust placed in God's people. That is a lot of trust placed in a battle plan that seemingly wouldn't even work. So what does this story mean for us today? Well, it tells us this, that we are the people, as God's people, that people who are far away from God trust. Because if they've never been to church, or they've had a bad template in their life, or a bad role model, then when they see a person of God, it's our responsibility to reflect the character of God to them. And so when they see us, they go, you know what? You're one of the people that follow a God who has all power, and nothing stands in his way. You're one of those people that I know has mercy and compassion and kindness, just like Jesus has mercy, compassion, and kindness. And you're one of those people who follows God's direction, which is why your life is different than everybody else's. I will tell you this about who sent them. Dan read as this opened up, Joshua the son of Nun sent 2 men to spy. Joshua the son of Nun. I don't know if you know what Jesus' name actually is, but it's Yahshua, which, by the way, is translated into Aramaic or Hebrew, Joshua. Jesus is Joshua in its unlatinized form. So here's something to think about. Joshua sent spies out. Jesus sends disciples out. And every Sunday we turn to that door and we're sent out into the land. The thing that this story tells us with these two spies is that our lack of skill will not stop the salvation of God. Had no effect, right? They were caught, they were found out, but that didn't stop God. Don't you ever worry when you go out that door to wherever you go, when it comes time to interact with the world, God will not be stopped. What are some of the things we might expect going out there? Well, here's some things. People are looking for someone to trust. People are looking for someone to trust. I read a statistic the other day. Globally, trust for governments is completely shot. I know. Imagine that, right? And it doesn't matter where you're at. It doesn't matter what country you're in, what continent you're on, what political party you're in. People don't trust authority anymore. Well, guess what? When I was a military history teacher, that's called a power vacuum. That means there's nothing there. There's a vacuum there, and there's something waiting to fill it. Well, we're seeing that day. We saw it at Asbury College when revival started. Kathy Cunningham just sent me an article. I don't know if you know about this, but last weekend on UK campus in Rupp Arena, they filled Rupp Arena and 7,000 college-age students came to the Lord. There is an outpouring on this country right now. And if we're skeptical about who to trust, you can only imagine your average college-age student today. Right? They've probably been told in their schools stuff. Who knows? But it's created skepticism. They've spent much time in extracurricular sports. But hey, how much does that get you when you're in college and trying to look for a date or form up your life? It's empty. It's hollow. There is a power vacuum now that God's power can fill. People are looking for someone to trust. And many times, people far from God know very well the works of God. Don't you not believe that? I think that people who are far from God, just like Rahab, know exactly who God is and what he can do. Their problem is they don't know how to approach him. But even though they do not know how to have a relationship with God, many times they only know God through you. Through you. Through you. Through me. They only know God through us. Many times their only way to reach God is your promise. Now, I don't want this to be confused with some sort of mysticism here. This is good foundational character. In catechism tonight, we're going to finish up a part of the catechism which encourages us to go and do righteous deeds. Listen to these righteous deeds. When you're dealing with somebody out there in the world and they don't know Jesus, but you know Jesus, many times their only way to reach God is your promise. Your promise to do good. Your promise to honor an agreement. To be straight with them in business. To be straight with them with your word. Or to act faithfully when no one else is faithful to them. They put trust in those things and in you when you reflect God's character. See, when you reflect God's character and you do good, it shows upon your Father in heaven. When you honor an agreement and you're honest, when you act faithfully, you affect them. They go, wow, this person just doesn't follow God, but the nature of God is in them. Now, this is only limited, and it's a temporary arrangement. It's only limited, and it's a temporary arrangement. There are way too many people who do these good things, but then turn them to their own ends. I can't tell you how many cult leaders do good, honor agreements, act faithfully, only to manipulate the people who follow them. This is not a thing of manipulation. This is an honor for us. That they see God in us, flawed as we are, reflecting Him, and temporary. It's when they actually turn to Jesus. They must turn to Jesus, not us, not you, not me, not this building. They must turn to Jesus. So make sure that you know that those things that you do are temporary. They're your reflection of God. So what's the ending of this story? How does this story end? With the walls falling down and this tower where Rahab is standing and she and her family are saved and they live happily ever after? Well, they do live happily ever after, but salvation, especially here and where we see it most of the time in the Old Testament, salvation isn't the finish line. It's the starting point of a lifelong journey with Christ. See, salvation isn't the end. It's this beginning. It's the beginning. Let me tell you what happened to her, this Rahab the harlot. She became holy, okay? She was set apart as Israel was set apart for God. If you have your Bibles with you, look at verse 25, I think. That's not 25. I wrote it down wrong. Let me find it. It's going to be 22. And then pardon came to the hill country. Oh, no, it is. It is 25. It's just a couple of chapters over. I should put the chapter beside it. It is verse 25, chapter 6. There we go. So 2 chapters over. The wall has fallen. The Israelites have marched around it. They've done they've followed God's exact instructions. The walls have fallen. And 2 chapters over, we find Rahab again. However, Rahab the harlot and her father's household and all she had, Joshua spared. And she has lived in the midst of Israel to this day, for she hid the messengers whom Joshua sent to spy out Jericho. Wow, what a testimony 2 chapters away. See, the story didn't end. She became holy as God was holy. They wouldn't have let her live in the midst of Israel had she not. But the story gets better from there, because not only did she live in the midst of Israel, adopting their ways and being with them, we find even later in Matthew chapter 1, verse 5, that she married Salmon, who was a descendant of Judah. And she became the mother of Boaz. Boaz would marry Ruth. Ruth would bear Jesse, and Jesse David. And so, Rahab, this harlot, who didn't trust God at first, but trusted God's people, became part of the very lineage of Jesus. Wow. I don't think she understood that. I don't think she would have even known that. I don't even think she was around to understand that her great-great-grandchild would become one of the most powerful kings of Israel ever. She just trusted in the moment. And she has one more accolade to her. If you turn to the book of Hebrews, Paul shows that her trust developed into strong faith because she's listed in the Faith Hall of Fame in Hebrews. So here's our bottom line as we end up today. Our bottom line is this: when people far from God trust you because you're living out the character of Christ by a sanctified life, that you helping them meet Christ and have and help them develop a relationship with Christ will truly glorify God. And in just doing what God tells us to do, living holy, sanctified lives, showing the world who he is through what his character's like through our character, who knows where that will end. Remember, she was a harlot who lived in an impregnable city. Who would have known? She was the grandmother of kings and the King of Kings. Amen.